Coming up on Cannabis Coast to Coast News with Alaina Pinto this week, with the government shut down, so are most efforts for federal cannabis reform. But the U.S. Hemp Roundtable enlightens President Trump on the economic dangers of a federal hemp ban. Kerry Hinkle has that story in his hemp report. And we turn our focus to the states, and we start in Ohio, where their Governor Mike DeWine issues an executive order to ban THC-infused hemp products for the next 90 days. We talk exclusively with Buckeye lobbyist and advocate Tim Johnson.
It's all propaganda about child safety.
In Michigan, that 24% tax hike is now in effect, and so is a lawsuit to stop it on constitutional grounds. Amie Carter with that story. Plus, New York State sets a new monthly record for sales as the Empire State Market continues to grow exponentially. And an update on the U.S. basketball player who suffers from Crohn's disease who got busted for medical edibles in Indonesia in May. Now, Jared Shaw faces the death penalty. He gives his first words of remorse from inside the prison in that country. And yes, the U.S. won't comment on wrongfully detained American citizens. Plus, the state of Nebraska finally gets around to issuing their first medical cannabis license, while a suspended and fined lab in Massachusetts called Assured is allowed to reopen with a new CEO. And with new ownership and leadership at High Times, that magazine publishes a special 50th anniversary issue. However, the only problem is with that, High Times has been around for 51 years. The new ownership group admits they probably were smoking too much weed to get the count right. Oops, sorry man, my bad. All that and more on Cannabis Coast to Coast News with Alaina Pinto next.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Cannabis Coast to Coast News, WPCM TV's weekly roundup of cannabis news from around the world. I'm Alaina Pinto. And just in case you've been on another planet over the past few weeks, the U.S. government has been closed for business after the two parties couldn't come up with an agreement to keep it open. There are some reports of unofficial meetings between the two political parties. However, there is no agreement in sight. Needless to say, federal cannabis reform gets even further delayed. So, we'll start off with another state that is prohibiting THC-infused products thanks to an executive order by their governor. That state is Ohio. The governor is Mike DeWine, and he has banned all THC products derived from hemp. We'll start with our executive producer, Jimmy Young, talking with Ohio lobbyist Tim Johnson.
Well, thanks, Alaina. Anytime anything happens in the state of Ohio, I get all excited because I get to reconnect with one of my favorite people in the cannabis industry. His name's Tim Johnson. He's a retired law enforcement officer, trainer, supporter, the whole nine yards, and he's also a pro-cannabis lobbyist in the state of Ohio. Tim, good to talk with you again. And always there's something going on in Ohio, isn't there?
Yeah, Jimmy, as always with you, it's a good pleasure to see you and speak with you and share my viewpoints of what I hear and see at the State House and so forth. So it's great to be here today.
And Governor DeWine now is using his executive power to put a temporary restraining order on sales of all THC-infused products and telling his legislature to come up with some regulations. Is that pretty much what the story is here? And are you confident that they're going to be able to do this?
Yeah, and he's been pushing, DeWine's been pushing for this, for a few years. I think what actually made him brave enough to push forward with it was the fact that September 30th, when the Farm Bill Act extension expired, which we expected to be signed and extended again. But I think he figured, okay, I can go ahead and do this now. But he did recognize the Farm Bill Act and give respect to the legitimate hemp license holder, or the legitimate hemp retailers' permission to continue to operate under that farm bill if they were compliant with it, minus what he instituted here. His whole thing, it's all propaganda about child safety, and politicians use that, and I feel it's pretty sad that they have to use children, when they're creating a cannabis law or a hemp law, whatever. If we want to talk about a state of emergency, melatonin is on the street right now as the new narcotic for adolescents, and it's killing kids. it's not just putting them in an ER, it's actually killing them. And you can buy the gummies. Anybody can walk into most health stores, grocery stores, and so forth and buy melatonin gummies. You take too many of them, it suppresses your respiratory system, is my understanding. Texas has an incident where some children died there. There's been some on the East Coast. I have, in the last 5 years, introduced a melatonin bill to regulate it in Ohio. And literally, I've talked to every legislative doctor we have. One of them or a couple of them were pediatricians, and I'm trying to tell them, hey, here's what's going on. And they just keep putting it on their table, but then all of a sudden there's an emergency executive order, health department, everything over what they call intoxicating hemp. And the reality of it is in Ohio, we see more children going to the ERs from products they've got from the legal industry than we have from what they call the gas station sushi. The intoxicating hemp products. So I got to throw the red flag, the BS on, this is for the children. No, it's not. It's a political move. We know you're politically pandering for your party because the elections are coming up here. We understand what's happening. We also understand, there's some of the license holders throwing money in your bank account or whatever, however that works. But the realistic thing is, as far as the intoxicating hemp, the EO, the executive order, I think it's been blown out of proportion. It's really not to the point where all hemp in Ohio is banned. That hasn't happened. When they refer to intoxicating hemp, and it says it in a thing, it is where you have extracted or adulterated a hemp product. And that's the problem. I have a problem with that as well. If I get, if I'm going to buy something, I don't care where it's from a dispensary or from a gas station, I want to know what I'm getting and I want it to be a safe product. I don't want back in that 2011, 12, whatever, the K2 stuff, if people were buying these little things at the gas stations and they created House Bill 64 in 2011. Look that up sometime. Wait to be surprised what that says. But it's to control these unknown chemicals that we're putting on hemp products, be it flour primarily. It's really not adulterating. Flour is the stuff that we're seeing sold in Ohio is over 0.3%. So that falls now into the cannabis realm. And I can verify that because last Monday, a law firm that I consult with as a criminal subject or drug policy subject matter reform specialist, we had our two clients were convicted of hemp. Both received a felony 5. And that was because the hemp went from 0.3% to 0.5% as per BCI's test. But that's the kind of stuff that we're seeing happen. And that's what we got to address and stop from happening.
We'll have that entire interview with Tim Johnson and Jimmy Young released on our one-on-one special report on Thursday. Now let's hear from our Ohio correspondent, Christina Brisson.
Hi, I'm Christina Brisson with Over the Top Renovations with your weekly Ohio Cannabis Report with Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I actually do have a big story to report this week. Governor Mike DeWine has signed to an executive order that will last for 90 days to remove intoxicating hemp products from shelves. People are saying this will affect a lot of businesses here in Ohio, and we're yet to see what's going to come. Now, that said, a lot of people say they're not necessarily going after store owners, and it's those people that are providing the product to said stores. Now, I recently reached out to someone and said, if I could provide something informative out to the public, what would you say that I should inform them about that has to do with these new rules and these intoxicating hemp products? And what he said is, the 2018 Farm Bill did not legalize THCA products. What it did was create a loophole for those products that were under 0.3%. And that's where we are today and trying to figure out how to regulate that, make it safe for people out in the public, and continue the growth for cannabis as we want to see, and the growth for recreational use, as well as medical, and how it can be better here in Ohio and other places going forward. That is your weekly Ohio Cannabis Report. I am Christina Brisson with Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
Ohio joins many other states that are trying to deal with an industry that is underregulated in many states after the Farm Bill of 2018 defined a legal version of the plant. Now the entire industry is fighting a federal movement to ban them. In the states, governors have been using their executive powers to regulate the hemp-derived products or try to ban them all outright. This week, the U.S. Hemp Roundtable wrote a letter to President Trump urging him not to allow Congress to ban hemp and basically close down their industry. Kerry Hinkle is our man on the hemp beat, and here's his report this week.
This week, we turn our attention to the Buckeye State, where Governor Mike DeWine has joined a growing number of governors that has decided to take executive action on all things hemp. This time, the governor of Ohio has decided that intoxicating hemp is a public health emergency, and therefore we must ban all of these products for the next 90 days, which is the maximum amount allowed under Ohio law. Now, the legislature has been considering for years proposals that are very similar to what the executive order has taken, in that it will require products above a certain THC limit of 2 milligrams in the entire package to only be sold in the regulated marijuana dispensary channel. Now, we understand lawsuits and litigation have already been filed, and this order will be challenged on several grounds to the validity and capabilities of the governor to ban this type of category unilaterally, whereas the legislature has not weighed in on this. And so we understand the governor did this for that exact reason, though, is that he wants to put pressure on the legislature over the next few months in the fall session to finally pass a regulatory bill. So we will monitor as Ohio plays out. But to speak to the big picture, this is a growing trend where across political aisles, governors are deciding, absent the legislatures passing any bills, that they can unilaterally decide to take action on these products. And what's interesting is that, Governor Newsom in California issued a very similar executive order to what DeWine in Ohio has issued, and that it was a flat out ban of all hemp products. And you really can't get, more different in political lines than what DeWine and Newsom are aligned. Whereas you may remember a few weeks ago, Governor Abbott in Texas, one of the most Republican states in the union, issued an executive order not banning, but instead regulating and requiring adults to purchase the product, good manufacturing and testing standards. And then growing to that list is Governor Pritzker in Illinois, where just a few weeks ago, he was asked at a press conference about the issue of intoxicating hemp. And he mentioned, I might do an executive order, we need the legislature to act. And so those are four of the biggest states in the country for both, revenue, projection, population, but also politically. As those four states go, typically goes the rest of the country. So to see these four governors floating out the idea of executive order, some bad, some good for the hemp industry, and not really relevant to the political parties, has been quite an interesting thing to track from the hemp industry perspective. So this week was bad news in Ohio, but it joins the growing trend as each state decides to legislate or regulate us differently. So again, I'm Kerry Hinkle with Bayou City Hemp, and I will be back again next week for another hemp report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
How about some positive news? We start with a salute to the state of New York. That market continues to grow its revenue, and this past month, the Empire State set a monthly record in sales with $214 million. That total is the largest in 1 month since the adult use market opened in 2021. In the meantime, in Michigan, that controversial 24% tax increase went into effect this past week and immediately was challenged by a lawsuit to stop it. Amie Carter has more from Michigan, where her report is sponsored by Wally's Wonderworld of customizable handmade humidors. Here's Amie.
This is mold on wheat. This is mold on weed. And this is what this Wonderworld plant is supposed to look like. Do you want to make sure this never happens to your precious flower? Check out the handmade humidors by Fenton, Michigan craftsman Gregory Johnson. Each humidor can hold 1 ounce of your stash, and it comes with a Boveda humidity pack. You care about your flower, so protect it inside a humidor made with American-grown maple, cherry, or sapele wood. Check out their website at wallyswonderworld.com. There you'll find the famous award-winning Hakuna Matata No Worries Humidor. You'll also find a variety of humidors with different designs. They even customize accessories like doobie tubes, grinders, and even a classic roach clip from the 70s. Treat your stash with class with a custom-made, handmade humidor from wallyswonderworld.com, and never worry about moldy weed again.
I'm Amie Carter with Michigan Weedsters for this week's Michigan Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Let's dive in. Last week, I covered the new 24% wholesale tax set to take effect January 1st, 2026. This tax on growers and processors is expected to raise $420 million for road funding. But the industry is pushing back hard. At least 2 lawsuits have been filed in the Court of Claims, including one from the Michigan Cannabis Industry Association. The lawsuits argue that the tax is illegal because it improperly alters the original 2018 voter-approved law without the required 3/4 majority vote. Critics fear that the tax will cause the price to increase so much that small businesses will close, jobs will be lost, and out-of-state sales will drastically decrease. We'll keep you updated on the legal fight for potholes. Michigan cops and the Cannabis Regulatory Agency are sounding the alarm over the state's black market. They report discovering ties between Chinese organized crime networks and large-scale illegal cannabis grow operations across Michigan. Officials warn that these unlicensed sites are undercutting the legal market, and resulting product poses a public safety risk due to lack of testing for harmful pesticides. Authorities are struggling to prosecute these felony operations effectively under the current state law. In Detroit, grow operation AP Cherry Industries surrendered its Class C license in an agreement with the Michigan Cannabis Regulatory Agency. This action came after an investigation uncovered a shocking list of regulatory violations, including a failure to account for thousands of pounds of product in the state tracking system. Most critically, the CRA alleges the company was selling pre-rolls to customers that had failed safety testing due to pesticide contamination. That's going to be it for this week. I'm Amie Carter with Michigan Weedsters for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
The Michigan Report is sponsored by Wally'sWonderworld.com.
Down in Virginia, that governor's race is starting to heat up, and there are two different approaches to cannabis reform with a state that has a vibrant medical program. This week, the two candidates for governor squared off in a debate, and one of the questions was a direct one about adult use laws, which the current governor vetoed twice during his term. Now, the Democrat Abigail Spanberger is facing off against the Republican Lieutenant Governor Winsome Earl-Sears, and one of them will become the first female governor of Virginia. Here's an excerpt from that heated debate this week.
We're going to go to Ms. Spanberger here on the topic of marijuana. You have stated your support legalizing a retail market for recreational marijuana that prioritizes public safety. What public safety concerns do you have? You have 30 seconds.
It's important that there be transparency in what is available on the market. As a former federal agent who worked narcotics cases, as a CIA officer who tracked transnational criminal organizations, as the only person on stage who's had bills signed into law by President Trump related to stopping the flow of fentanyl into our
you're talking over
country.
Each other. Please continue.
As the only person on stage who's had a bill signed into law by President Trump restricting fentanyl flowing into our country and tightening our border security, and as the only person on stage with the endorsement of the Police Benevolent Association, it is extraordinarily important that we have transparency and that there is a clear market in order to be enforced, because it is in the absence of an open and clear and extraordinarily transparent market that law enforcement is not able to...
Don't even know what you're saying.
Ms. Spanberger, your time is up. Now we'll go to Ms. Earl-Sears on this issue. The governor has twice vetoed bipartisan efforts to legalize a retail market for recreational cannabis. Would you sign a bill legalizing the commercial sale of any cannabis products in Virginia? You have 30 seconds.
I believe in medicinal marijuana. I believe it has value. But you know, I had a business, and when I had my business and my employees came up positive for marijuana, they couldn't work for me. They couldn't drive my trucks. They couldn't go in and repair anything. We were working on gas. We're working on electric. We can't afford to have people who are working and they don't know what they're doing. They'll blow everything up. Now, my opponent, I don't understand. You know, she says one thing and then she does another, or she does one thing and says another.
Your time
we
is up,
can't
Ms.
figure
Sears.
her out.
Now let's check with Joe Parsons to see his take on the debate performances and the obvious divide on the cannabis question between the two candidates.
I'm Joe Parsons with the Virginia Cannabis Connection from Higher Education's Coffee Talk and reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Following up from last week, the Virginia Department of Agricultural and Consumer Services, or VDACS, has began to strictly enforce the decision that was handed down by the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals in January. A few businesses in the Henrico, Chesterfield, and Richmond area are now in the finding out phase of these new enforcements. The Simpson Smoke Shop in Henrico, Gas City in Richmond, and 3 Zaza locations, including the newest Zaza R Us that has only been open a little over a month. 8 people have been arrested, and over 60 pounds of what was once legal THCA is now classified as illegal marijuana has been confiscated. The bust was a group effort with the Henrico County Police Department and federal law enforcement. The bust was also responsible for finding over 12 pounds of THC edibles and over $100,000 in cash. It looks like the THCA market in Virginia has began to collapse. And now it's up to legislators to act like they did in Texas, or else many more people and businesses will fail. On an interesting side note, the Zaza Group is no stranger to controversy and legal battles. The dispensary chain was started in New York City during the COVID epidemic and founded by Nadal Y. Salih. Their problems began in 2023 when the toy giant Toys R Us decided to sue the dispensary for using their logo designs, especially the backwards R in the name. The class action lawsuit brought all the wrong attention to the stores that were in Brooklyn, New York. Now that case was settled out of court. However, that attention led to the city taking a closer look at the stores, only to find out that they didn't have proper licenses for operation to begin with. After an extreme amount of fines, they closed all their locations. Well, at least the ones that were in New York, that is. Then they set their eyes on the Commonwealth. They set up Zaza Puff Palace and Zaza Wonderland in Richmond, with affiliate stores in Williamsburg. Then in August, they decided to revitalize the name Zaza R Us in Henrico. And again, that caught attention, this time of the Richmond DEA. All the more reason to have a regulated and safe cannabis system functioning for Virginia. Well, that's going to do it for this week from Higher Education's Coffee Talk, sponsored by 97.5 through WB in Charlottesville. And reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News, I'm Joe Parsons. Until next time, stay lifted.
That'll do it for the A Block, but we've got plenty more this week, including our international report and an update on the fate of a jailed professional basketball player named Jared Shaw in Indonesia for receiving a shipment of edibles to treat his Crohn's disease. That country that has some of the most strict penalties, and Shaw could be facing the death penalty. We'll have the details when Cannabis Coast to Coast News continues after this.
Your cannabis business could be overpaying by hundreds of thousands of dollars in federal income taxes because of one simple assumption that you're making about your accountant. A dispensary owner in Colorado called me frustrated as hell. He'd been working with the same accountant for 3 years. His accountant said, "What's 471C?" Here's what the ignorance of that accountant was costing this business owner. $180,000 every single year for 3 years. 471C has been around since 2017. We're talking about an 8-year-old tax provision that many cannabis CPAs don't fully understand. 471C is one of the most complex and highly debated tax strategies in the cannabis industry. If you want to make sure you're not leaving any money on the table, I'm offering free 471C reviews this month. Link in the description.
Accounting Buds has grown into Buds Group, the same award-winning quality, now with more service offerings. Buds Group, your best buds in the biz.
Looking for PR that over-delivers on expectations? At Maverick Public Relations, they pair big agency experience with personalized attention. From launching award-winning brands to securing top-tier media hits, their data-driven communications team helps visionary leaders and entrepreneurs rise above the media noise. Maverick PR is responsive, collaborative, and relentless about results and ROI. Visit themaverickpr.com and make headlines together.
If you want to make history, if you want to be part of history, if you want to say you helped legalize marijuana in America, now is the time to join us.
Welcome back to Cannabis Coast to Coast News. This is the B Block, or second section of our news program this week. I'm Alaina Pinto. The country of Spain is ready to move forward with a medical program that will be controlled in hospitals and the pharmacies operating in those hospitals. The executive branch of their government, the Council of Ministers, is headed up by Spain's Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez, who made the announcement this week. Medicinal cannabis will be allowed to be prescribed by hospital doctors who have recognized that traditional treatments are not working for their patients. Those cannabis specialists, MDs, are now allowed to prescribe cannabis for citizens who suffer from chronic pain, cancer, and severe epilepsy. Even though the executive branch announced this policy this week, it's not an official law until the Spanish Congress approves it. Now let's check in on the UK with Dave Barton.
I'm Dave Barton from Thermidor with your UK Cannabis Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Experts from some of the UK's leading healthcare agencies say that more real-world evidence, or RWE, is needed to unlock crucial insights into how cannabis-based products for medicinal use, CBPMs, work in practice. This would help widen patient access and guide clinical decision-making, unlike randomized controlled trials, or RCTs, which are still considered the gold standard in research methodology. The UK's Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency, the MHRA, and National Institute for Health and Care Excellence, NICE, have both acknowledged the importance of RWE in filling evidence gaps and speeding up patient access across all new healthcare interventions. Dr. Anne Schlag from Drug Science here in the UK said that RCTs do not lend themselves well to the study of whole plant medicine, and that RWE takes into account larger groups of patients, a broader range of CBPMs, and more medical conditions. That's all for this week's UK Report. I'm Dave Barton from Thermidor reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
This is Debbie Facey with the Canadian Coast to Coast Cannabis News Report. So what we have in Canada this week is some great news when it came to the pain management. So what we had was a test that they did for a 12-week or 12-month period, which is a year. It was to use the sesame seed oil with a full spectrum cannabis extract, which is most likely RSO. And what they did was they were able to utilize this test and see that over, not only did the pain management actually become way more manageable, avoiding any sort of opiates that are going to be normally prescribed, but it had helped over 500 million people worldwide throughout this whole trial period, which is a great scientific fact, especially when it comes to us creating more pain management, especially when it comes to the cannabis industry. So this is a great thing. The next thing that we have in Canada is that we are now using the overall GSM-1 barcode system, which means that this standard barcode system is going to be something that is going to be a lot easier for more of these LPs and stores to be able to follow along when it comes to their stock, when it comes to their batches, as well as any recalls that have to be done. So when it comes to Canada, this is Debbie Facey with your Canadian Coast to Coast Cannabis News Report. Peace.
Back in May, Texas native and professional basketball player 35-year-old Jared Shaw was busted for a shipment of edibles he uses as medicine to treat his Crohn's disease. The problem is that Shaw plays professionally in Indonesia, and they have some of the harshest cannabis laws in the world. Now, Shaw may be facing a life sentence at best and execution at worst. We led with that story back in May, and this week, The Guardian scored an interview with Shaw in prison in Jakarta. Shaw explained why he needs the edibles to treat his Crohn's disease. Quote, "There's no medicine apart from cannabis that stops my stomach from aching. I made a stupid mistake. There's people telling me I'm about to spend the rest of my life in prison over some edibles. I've never been through anything like this." Unquote. He added that after just 2 months, quote, "He was at the lowest point in my life, a really dark mental place," unquote. This is Mental Health Awareness Month, and there are many stories being shared by others who struggle with their own mental health challenges, Shaw added. "I felt hopeless and alone. I didn't want to wake up again," end quote. The Marijuana Moment newsletter reached out to the U.S. State Department for a comment on the wrongfully detained citizen, and they admitted they were aware of the situation but couldn't comment due to privacy concerns. Back here in the U.S., cannabis reforms and new laws in Missouri have been applauded by the industry and are some of the most liberal in the country. Now, the state Supreme Court in Missouri wants to make changes to the original rules on the expungement of past cannabis convictions. Those rules were part of the original ballot initiative for legal adult use that passed by wide margin. The changes are already causing some citizens to challenge that initiative on a constitutional basis. In Nebraska, the medical program that has been delayed multiple times actually issued 2 licenses this week. These are the first to be granted in that state after the ballot initiative passed last year. 2 cannabis cultivators got licenses for the medical program. There were 40 applications and only 4 were granted provisional licenses before the 2 cultivators were issued the official licenses to commence operations. The Attorney General in that state, Mike Hilgers, is no fan of cannabis and has tried to stop the process and challenge it based on that state's constitution. His office has yet to comment on whether he will allow the process to continue. But for now, the first 2 licenses have been awarded, and they will be the first to legally grow the plant medicine in the Cornhusker state. Now let's check in with Adult Use Ballot Initiative in Oklahoma with Kimmy Cannabis.
I am Kimmy Cannabis from Can I Talk About It with the Oklahoma Cannabis Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. The Oklahoma Medical Marijuana Authority has issued both an embargo and recall involving Rocking R Cannabis, operated by Michael William Redis. The embargo began on September 25th and the recall followed on October 10th. The recall impacts more than 60 infused pre-roll and vape products due to improper testing methods. Patients are urged to check the full recall list on omama.ok.gov/recall to see if any products they purchased are affected and the action to take. In other news, the Oklahoma Bureau of Narcotics seized over 14,000 marijuana plants and made 2 arrests at a Holdenville grow site during an ongoing investigation. But not every enforcement story involves bad actors. One anonymous Oklahoma mom and pop grower shared their experience of being forced to surrender their license after months of battling red tape and confusion. They first submitted their certificate of occupancy application in August of 2023, well before the deadline, but it was rejected twice over technicalities before finally being approved in March. By then, new emergency rules from the OBN had already threatened their license status. They invested thousands of dollars to meet shifting state requirements and were even quoted over $13,000 for required fire monitoring system, only to receive conflicting guidance from different agencies. After multiple failed attempts to get clarity, they were advised by OBN officials to surrender their license rather than to face enforcement action. They described the experience as license purgatory, saying it's getting harder for small compliant Oklahoma growers to survive under the current system. And in uplifting news, the Cancer Playbook, which started right here in Oklahoma, is now expanding to Colorado. Because of Colorado's recreational cannabis market, any cancer patient willing to travel can now legally join the FECO program and access affordable, high-quality FECO with no medical card required. Another great reason to sign State Question 837 and bring adult use access right here to Oklahoma. That's it from Oklahoma. I'm Kimmy Cannabis from Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Peace, love, and all that good stuff.
I'm Dina Naguib, Principal Consultant at Grass Goddess Consulting, here to give you the latest developments in California for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. This week, the former Benzinga Cannabis Capital Conference came back as Ignite to host a market spotlight on California in Anaheim. It's the same Benzinga we all know, just with a new name. The panel's content and connections are still the top caliber people come to expect. It was a great gathering of thought leaders, industry experts, and regulators coming together to take a look at the California market. One notable talk was a letter that Ben Larson read based on the letter he wrote to Governor Newsom opposing AB 8. AB 8 incorporates intoxicating hemp-derived cannabinoids into the regulated cannabis industry, and as one of the leaders in the hemp beverage space, Ben's company Vertosa will now be moving facilities out of state. It was a poignant moment in a room full of people who mostly supported the bill. In addition, LA City Council member Imelda Padilla spoke to the room about how we can't give up on California and that regulators want to help make the industry better, but we need to keep showing up. These important discussions need to keep happening, and it's encouraging that the Lane brothers are keeping the Benzinga vibes going through the new Ignited. I'm Dina Naguib with Grass Goddess Consulting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
Now that the state of Texas is operating under new state regulations for hemp, the next step is for that state to enforce the new rules. On Tuesday of this week, Texas Governor Greg Abbott ordered the Criminal Investigations Division of the Department of Public Service to target smoke shops to ensure that those stores are not selling hemp products to people under the age of 21. That was one of the biggest rules that Abbott's executive directive was concerned about, since proof of age had never been enforced in that state. That will change now. No changes in Nevada, but plenty of news from tribal lands who are now operational in many states. Here's Tina Tasaka.
I'm Tina Tasaka with 420 Technologies and Iconic Representation, and this is the Nevada and Tribal Nations Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. A Las Vegas man, O. Ryan Brooks, 27, faces charges after a hit-and-run crash near the intersection of Eastern Avenue and Owens Avenue that killed 12-year-old Christopher Suarez. According to arrest reports, Brooks admitted he smoked marijuana from a THC vape pen shortly before the crash, then smoked again after, saying he knew he was going to jail. The collision occurred in a marked school zone just before 7:40 a.m. Brooks is being held on $250,000 bail and faces multiple felony counts, including DUI causing death and leaving the scene. Senator Tom Tillis, Republican, North Carolina, urged U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi to ask the DOJ to investigate the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians over their cannabis operations. At a Senate Judiciary hearing, he accused the tribe's cannabis marketing of preying on younger people, citing promotions like pumpkin spice flavors and an ordering app. In response, Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians Principal Chief Mitchell Hicks defended the operations fully legal and accused Tillis of misrepresenting the tribe's practices. That's it for the Nevada highlights and tribal nations. I'm Tina Tasaka with 420 Technologies and Iconic Representation for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
In Massachusetts, it certainly didn't take Shannon O'Brien long from retaking control of the Cannabis Control Commission. Not only did she stop the progress towards social consumption lounges and regulations, but now she revoked the license of a dispensary that had already closed for many other issues. But this is the first time a license has been officially revoked. Here's Curtis Emery with more from the Bay State.
I'm Curtis Emery, a bud tender from Resonate in Worcester, Massachusetts, with the Bay State Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. A breaking story here in Massachusetts, troubled cannabis dispensary Elevate in Athol, Mass. has been given its final notice by the CCC, which officially revoked its license to operate in the state this month. Elevate in Athol came into some legal trouble in 2023 with the CEO being accused of abusing employees and with stark non-compliance with the CCC, essentially disregarding any sort of guidance offered by the regulatory body. Was given multiple warnings to cease operations, which led to an extreme video that was posted on social media, which threatened harm and death on past employees and their families. Elevate seemed to have stopped operating, but it wasn't until August 2025 of this year that the CEO applied to be part of the state's social equity program. It was then that the CCC realized that this man was still trying to operate in the state regardless of what happened in 2023, prompting the regulatory body for the first time in this Commonwealth's history to revoke the license of this dispensary. Also in the news, House Bill 159, an act to end discrimination against employees who use cannabis illegally in the state, has passed its second reading in the House. It goes on with third reading. It will also move on to continue its path to be or not be law here in the state. The bill essentially aims to make sure that adult use cannabis is not going to affect your employment. You cannot be harassed or barred from employment if you're using cannabis legally and within legal means, and it doesn't affect any sort of licensure that you might need for the job. I've been Curtis Emery with the Bay State Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
That will do it for the B block, but we still have one more section to go, including stories from Illinois, California, and Doug Miller's High on Wall Street report. We'll see if that rally from last week with the cannabis stocks was sustained, or did the stocks go back to where they were before the president posted a CBD and healthcare video on Truth Social. Cannabis Coast to Coast News continues after this break.
Hi, I'm Jimmy Young, and it's time for School. That's School with a K. I love the name of this platform because it's the first course I'll be teaching where spelling really doesn't count. It's how words sound, how you pronounce them, and how clear your speech is. Do you have the mumbles? You know what I mean? Do you have the dreaded itis, gap fillers? The course is called Teaching Generation Text to Talk. I've done this for decades as a professional broadcaster on TV. I've even won an Emmy Award as a sports talk show host for a kids show I co-created in the 1990s for the TV channel that I work for in Boston. I've mentored hundreds of young people on their journey in the broadcast community, and I'm sure some of them will join me to share what they are doing now. And the whole idea of this is to get people to listen when you talk and to get them to understand you. I use the decades of experience I have in broadcasting to share the tools and exercises that will improve your oral communication skills, even the nonverbal ones. You know, many speech experts believe that 90% of communication is nonverbal. Do you make eye contact? Do you talk with your hands, like I do? Is your handshake firm or wimpy? All these skills will help you build your confidence by putting the phone down and actually talking to people. Do you have a personal elevator pitch? Who are you? Where are you from? What do you do for a living? What distinguishes you or differentiates you from others who might be applying for the same job? I've got 10 one-hour lessons that I'll be offering to individuals or in groups of 5. I call the workshops EPIC. That's E for enunciation, P for pronunciation, I for inflection, and C for cadence. I'll also be offering a free 1 hour, once a week call-in show where you could just join me to ask any questions you want. I've got a background in sports, so I love to talk about that, but I've also built a network for one of the most controversial industries in modern society. That's right, it's the cannabis industry. I'm the executive producer of the nation's only TV news-style show called Cannabis Coast to Coast News with the very talented Alaina Pinto. Now, it's all about learning how to talk, to speak, to communicate like a broadcaster. It's epic! So join my community that I'm calling the Forever Young School of Communication. Sign up for the first course, Teaching Generation Text to Talk. And for now and forever, I'm Jimmy Young, and I look forward to talking to you.
Welcome back to the C block, or final section of this week's Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'm Alaina Pinto. Next up, did the cannabis stocks fall this week, or did they sustain their rally? Here's Doug Miller's High on Wall Street report for the week.
I'm Doug Miller from High on Wall Street with this week's cannabis stock report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Tilray brand surged more than 20% Thursday after posting a major turnaround in its first quarter earnings. The company flipped last year's loss of $34.7 million into a profit of $1.5 million while hitting a record $210 million in revenue. That momentum has pushed Tilray stock up over 400% since June. But not everyone on Wall Street celebrating. Options traders are bracing for turbulence, with near-term expectations showing a 15% swing and downside protection. Analysts point to challenges as Tilray's gross margin slipped and its beverage segment, once hyped as growth engine, saw profits fall by $1.6 million. We did see a big market dip on Friday as Trump mentioned more tariffs on China. So we'll be watching to see how the market wants to react and, of course, what the cannabis sector wants to do. Tilray's trading around $1.72, and it could pull back some. So watch for dips, trade smart, and lock in those profits. And that's this week's Cannabis Stock Report. Reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News, I'm Doug Miller.
There is still some reaction from cannabis consumers who saw the video President Trump posted on Truth Social a few weeks ago that was produced by the Commonwealth Project. In case you haven't seen it yet, it is the closest thing to a public service announcement that has been allowed by traditional media and social media platforms. It introduces and explains the endocannabinoid system that this plant medicine directly interacts with. You can see it on our YouTube channel with our new breaking news playlist. It also discusses the benefits of CBD for seniors. In the results of a recent poll by Marijuana Moment and Nug MD magazine, cannabis consumers were not impressed by the PSA video posted by the president a few weeks ago. In fact, the majority of consumers continue to disapprove of the president's policy or impact on federal reform. 47% of consumers polled said they have no opinion or a neutral view of the president's cannabis policy. Another 42% said they either disapprove or strongly disapprove of his non-action so far. In Illinois, their governor, J.B. Pritzker, has been focused on challenging the president's plan to use National Guard troops in Chicago. So, how do you think the Chicago clone guy feels about all that? Here's Mark Allen's report from his home state as he opens up his grow facility that he's been working on for a few years now. Here's Mark.
What's up, everybody? I'm Mark Allen, the Chicago clone guy, reporting from the Clone Castle, just outside of Chicago, Illinois. Thanks for tuning in for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Always something going on here at Chicagoland area, Illinois. I just wanted to talk about what's behind me really quick. I figure you might be asking, what's that big black tank? Well, that's my water. Out here in the country, I built this whole facility. You can't just tap into water like in Chicago. Like, you have to dig a well. And unfortunately, the water sucks out here. So I had to get a big tank to store it and then treat it myself, which I'm actually treating it chemically free. No chlorine, no hydrogen peroxide. I'm just using an oxidation process to bubble the water, which essentially bubbles the heavy metals out of it. Then that tube right there behind me, there's a vent on the outside that pulls that smell, that stinky rotten egg smell out. But then I also have carbon filters, 50 micron filters, and I have an ultraviolet filter at the end to get all the bacteria out. But anyways, just want to give you a little interesting information on this process, which was very interesting, very difficult to figure out. But anyways, interesting news going on here. The Illinois Department of Agriculture is hosting a public meeting on cannabis plant, an update on the cannabis plant monitoring system that they use. They want to change tags and the way they update and the way they pretty much just track the plants from all the way from the beginning to the end. So that's pretty cool that they're actually letting people, comment. Normally they just do stuff, so I like that. Another thing the IDOA did that was actually good, that is good, affects me directly, is that they posted a new website online portal for their 2025 hemp cultivator final report. Simply put, I need to go on this online tool, fill in how much I grew, what I did, how I grew it, what I did or what I didn't do. But there's a new box on this list in this new online tool that actually is for propagation, which is exactly me. So I didn't grow anything yet. I'm just barely even open. So I already went in there. I grew zero hemp. I grew zero hemp. I grew zero flower hemp, but I'm going to be a propagator soon. So that website is operating efficiently and easily. So well done to the IDOA for numerous things recently. I'm surprised I say that, but I give credit where credit's due. But anyways, I'm Mark Allen, the Chicago Clone Guy, reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Thanks for tuning in.
The state of Minnesota is slowly rolling out more licenses. The lucky few who have already opened their doors are enjoying the benefits of growing and selling the plant medicine in their now legal adult use state. Alysha Bellamy is an active advocate and entrepreneur in Minnesota. Here's her report for the week.
I'm Alysha Bellamy for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. This is your Minnesota edition, and I am a part of the Minnesota Cannabis College and the founder of Herbs and Herbs. October 1st, we have opening on the Silla website the low potency hemp edibles license. That license is for retailers, edible manufacturers, and for wholesalers. This is a non-social equity license that you can attain through the state of Minnesota. In 2024, Minnesota sold $145 million worth of low-potency hemp edibles, and in 2025, we're looking to eclipse $200 million in sales. One thing, though, with the new labeling and packaging that the OCM has put out, some people are thinking of moving out of the Minnesota market for a more reasonably priced labeling and packaging compliance program. November 3rd, we have our medical cannabis consulting training program proposal starting. That again is November 3rd, and that window closes December 1st. You need this license to be able to sell medical marijuana in your dispensary. I'm Alysha Bellamy for Cannabis Coast to Coast News, the Minnesota Cannabis College, and Herbs and Herbs.
Let's talk about High Times. Earlier this year, Josh Kesselman, the CEO of Raw Rolling Papers, bought High Times out of receivership and is relaunching the iconic magazine online and in print. They even released a special 50th anniversary cover in September. Steve Bloom, the celeb stoner himself and former editor at High Times, explained in his newsletter that it's the 51st year of the magazine, not the 50th. Josh Kesselman, who is one of the great characters and personalities in the industry and the new owner, explained that they knew about it and published it a little late because we got high. Now that has been pretty consistent over the past 51 years at High Times. So that'll do it for this week's Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'm Alaina Pinto. Remember, it's a whole new world of weed out there, so consume it responsibly, and we'll see you next week.
I think I messed up. Did you know there's a place that covers all the cannabis news you need? Pro Cannabis Media is now WPCM TV, your go-to website for things cannabis. WPCM TV is the CNBC of weed, bringing you the latest news you need.
Amie Carter. This week, she reports from inside the State House in Lansing.
I'm Amie Carter from Michigan Weedsters with this week's Michigan Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
And talk shows about all things cannabis.
Well, thank you, and thank you for all you're doing to get the word out. Like, this show is so important.
It all started back in 2018 when Emmy award-winning talk show host Jimmy Young kicked it off with the In the Weeds podcast.
That it's not just any generic paper towel. You do have a brand that you use, right?
Yeah, we live or die by the bounty. I mean...
The quicker picker-upper! I love that!
His mission? Building an army of multimedia journalists and podcast hosts who are documenting the fight to end cannabis prohibition in this country and around the world. Fast forward to today, and we've got the nation's only weekly cannabis coast-to-coast news program with Alaina Pinto.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to this week's Cannabis Coast to Coast News, WPCM TV's weekly production of the fight to end cannabis prohibition in this country and around the world. I'm Alaina Pinto.
Delivering the nation's only TV news-style program. Since June 2021, WPCM TV has racked up over 1.3 million views with 17 million impressions and picked up over 16,000 subscribers on YouTube alone. For more information, contact the team at WPCMTV.com.